feel like I should call these the messy bed, the messy bed chats. I want to do a video about self-care, embodiment, something in that general vicinity. And let's see what comes up here. You know, this is a hard world that we have incarnated into. I'm just gonna go full new age freak show here. I don't know if it's new age, but yeah, we've incarnated into a some ways an impossible situation to be given these just crazy animal bodies. If we want to use this lens, and I don't know how strictly I subscribe to it these days, but evolutionary biological perspective, that we've got these just utterly animalistic drives in these bodies. And, you know, from that perspective, you know, and getting into like brain biology and limbic system and all this stuff, got all these primitive dimensions of our being, of our bodies, reflected in our psychology, etc. Again, I don't know. Further I go on this path, I don't know how much credence I want to how much value I want to ascribe or invest in that area, but just for the sake of exploring here. And we're given also, and let's get real dualistic here, make some stark dichotomies. We're given this divine nature, this spiritual nature, this higher, better angels of our nature, these higher aspirations, higher values, but also just this divine, transcendent dimension of who we are. And you throw those two things together, and it's interesting. It's a recipe for interesting times, having that kind of a setup as your starting point, right? Interesting being a say euphemism for many other things I could say here. Challenge. It's a challenge, let's say it that way. But even that doesn't, it's an impossible situation we're put into. A few people are going to say that. But I think it's just an acknowledgement of the reality. And so we fragment and we break and we distort and we suppress and stuff and addict and distract and and let's add into this equation. So that's that's roughly what I described as roughly the situation the individual finds themselves in, but the individual is not an island. No, somehow we come up in these crazy family systems. Which are themselves connected to a historical depth dimension of the madness of the species, but also to the collective um, and beings at every level of development and confusion and distortion and chaos, and we have to work jobs, and we have to it's just like oh man, from a certain perspective it's just um hard to comprehend. I mean, from most perspectives, it's just hard to comprehend the predicament we find ourselves in on this planet. But at some point, if you're going, it's hard to know which metaphor to use here. At some point, let's just say in an incarnation, one wakes up, one recognizes the impossibility of the situation that they're in. And another one of these little paradoxes or Chinese finger traps or another one of these kind of crucible-like aspects of this world. We're given a moral sense. That's a big one. That's a very hard one. That's a brutal one. Especially if you try to take any of that seriously with any sort of integrity. To do right in this world, to do good in a world that is seemingly so oriented towards evil, towards injustice, towards causing harm. Disrespect, disregarding of what's good and true and right. So we land in that world, and yet we're given a moral sense. Again, it's just set up for a very difficult time here on this planet. Another one, pleasure seeking. And yet so many of us are thrown into such difficult, brutal circumstances. But at some point in the merry-go-round of this madness, of this freak show on this planet, at some point one can look around, and even in the best of circumstances, but certainly in difficult circumstances, one can look around and say, the fuck is going on? Seriously, what the hell? What the fuck is going on here? Why is this just such a mad place that we're in? And why is my heart, why do I have a heart if I'm going to just be thrown into this, is the term maelstrom? Maelstrom? Into this blizzard of freaks and knives and pain. Why am I given a human heart that is tender and soft and cares, you know? Why give me that if you're going to throw me into this madhouse? It just doesn't make a lot of sense at some level. But you look around at all of this, and you think there's got to be more. There's got to be more. There's got to be better. There's got to be. This just can't be right. And that's a devastating moment in some ways, because for most people throughout time, I think this is a fair statement. No, let me not frame it that way. It's like you're given really you're given two options. Maybe there's more. As I talk this through, let's see what comes up here. But for most people, confronting the untenability of this impossible situation that we're in, the uh, the world as it is, ourselves as we are, um, fragmentation is sort of the human predicament, and by that I mean psychic, spiritual, emotional fragmentation. Of course, there's correlates, you know, in society and in the more manifest domain, but in the subtler levels is sort of where the ground gets laid for a lot of this. And we addict, I'm convinced, and I've said this before, addiction is the human predicament. What we mean when we say human nature in a sort of critical sense. Now, it's not the deepest dimension of our nature, but just kind of in a common, conventional way of saying it when we're talking about human nature or human predicament. Is there another term I can't think of right now? I guess sin in a Christian context, Judeo-Christian. But I think what we mean by that is addiction. And addiction happens as a way of avoiding pain. It's a kind of self-medication. But it's so default. It is so the water that we swim in. It is so normalized, so endemic to the human experience that it's hard to see it for what it is. And ever more so, it's like there's a concern that I see sometimes with the phone, social media, endless entertainment, endless access to distraction. It's like we lose more and more contact with that thread that can lead us back into wholeness, into alignment, into God. Because we're just anesthetized in some sense, we're numb. And a part of me is really pissed off at the world and at people because on some level, individuals have to be accountable. That's the only escape hatch in all of this. And people are not accountable. They're so lost. We are so lost. I am so lost. Less so because I've given over my entire life to discovery, to healing, to truth, to peace, to healing, basically, and exploring these issues. But 99.9% of the world and addiction So I am pissed off because people don't give a fuck to heal. They just pass their shit around onto their kids, onto their friend group, onto coworkers, onto whoever, you know. And there's all these it's like energetic. It's happening at a slightly less, it manifests verbally, it manifests all kinds of ways, in unhealthy ways, in more behavioral, physical, uh, detectable uh, ways. But primarily, I'm convinced just through experience that's happening at a slightly pre-verbal or subverbal, or whatever the right way to express it, at an energetic level. But there's all these, and it's like we're junkies. It's like we're in this conspiratorial web matrix, this web of addictedness. And we need each other. It's almost like we're using each other. I'm trying to figure out the right drug metaphor here. And I can't. I can't think of one right now. Something like energetic vampirism. But man, it's just so apparent, especially when you try to swim upstream, or you try to break out of that. Then it becomes very apparent, the fix that we're in, the hell realm dimension of this planet. Not that it's all hell, but there is a manifest hell. And something in other people who are not at a point or at a stage yet of accountability, of saying, I'm done hurting myself, I'm done hurting other people. That's the spiritual commitment, essentially. Bodhisattva, Christ-like, however you want to think of it, but I'm done hurting the world, I'm done hurting myself. It's time to heal. But you become marked, because in 1,000, 100,000, million ways, the moment that switch flips, Lord, help me with some metaphors here. But the moment that switch flips, probably at an energetic level, signals are being sent out, but also just in all the tiny little minutia and daily interactions, 1,000 points of contact with the world. You're emitting a different energy, you're emitting a different vibe, and many people will feel threatened by it because it holds a mirror up to their own mask, their own wounds, their own patterns. And some people, and some people will be attracted to it. I mean, but that's the loneliness of the spiritual path in so many, in just a few words. That loneliness happens because you're no longer marching in lockstep. There's the image of the crabs in the barrel, and the one crab crawling out and the other crab's trying to pull it back in. It's something like that. It's demonic is another way to say it. And for a long time, This is one way that Christianity has helped me. It's helped me to be a little bit more bold with my spirituality. For a long time, I sort of would shy away from saying things too explicitly like that. Um, now, I'm not attached to that word demonic, but uh, it's not a bad one either. Because we have all these patterns inside of us, and beyond patterns, actual manifest spiritual interference. That's a topic for another video, but um, and when you start to extract yourself from the tar pit cesspool of default humanity, excuse me for speaking so strongly, um, it's like there's a momentum there, and there is a strong gravity there. It's like magnets. Um, but what I was trying to figure out a way to talk about is like there's just 1,000 points of social interaction where you start just by the nature of trying to heal and trying to move in a way that takes you out of the madness. There's 1,000 little decision points and ways that you no longer fit in, that no longer feel in alignment, feel in attunement. And I have just spent the last 6 months I guess probably 6 months, maybe a little bit more, working in a very, I've called it the cran box of humanity at this large grocery store. It's sort of like a grocery store plus. It's got some like a little food court, and I don't know if upscale is quite the right term. It's not upscale, but it's maybe a step up from just a regular grocery store in terms of what it offers, in terms of the size, and it's also new, so it does have a little bit of a new car smell, and it's not like some. There could be worse places, let's put it that way, but um, it, boy, for somebody like me who is an introvert, probably monk archetype, loves solitude, finds great peace, healing in solitude, spent a long time just in solitude, uh, would be happy with that kind of quietude, solitude, serenity, peace, minimal requirements. That's one great gift of the spiritual path, is it's helped to activate that for me and help me to work through a lot of things where I no longer crave. My identity is less and less bound to other people, and don't really crave uh, really anything of significance for myself in other people. There's a shadow side, major shadow sides to that. However, of the many things that are in darkened for me, the many shadows that I still am contending with, that's one that is not so dark for me. I think it's just mostly a good thing for me, and something that I feel good about. And in part, I can say it's because I've put so much effort into healing, and can give myself that credit. Maybe some dispositional things there too, but I know the journey I've been on, and I think there's a real gift that introverts have, or people that love and can flourish in their own company, you know. Now, introversion, I feel I just have to say maybe a little defensiveness here because so few people seem to understand it, unless you are one, but doesn't mean hatred of people. Can we just get that clear? That's not what introversion is. Does not mean you hate people. That's not what that's misanthropy or something. Doesn't mean you're shy. Doesn't mean that at all. No, you just recharge on your own. You find peace, enjoyment on your own. Doesn't mean you can't interact with people, but it means there's a freedom there where you don't need other people. That's a great freedom. But anyways, I've been working this job. In some ways, it's a great blessing because I was out of work for a long time, part due to, it's a complicated story, but the path of healing, path of awakening, path of, let's just say healing. I don't really like that other term. And it can be hard to get back. Sometimes God takes us out of the world for a season or for multiple seasons. And then sometimes, you bump up against homelessness and you have to find a way to not do that. Because you can get really imbalanced. And I did. I got really imbalanced in the direction of emptiness and, I wouldn't say retreat from the world. See, the thing about the monk, the yogi, the person on the path, the spiritual thing about the spiritual path is it's not a retreat from the world. The world is a retreat from the self. We've got that totally backwards. The default world of just being addicted, to our devices, to cigarettes, to alcohol, to porn, to relationships, to work. I don't want to say that's easy because that's a path, that's a hell realm. But comparatively speaking, it's the default. It's the movement of the stream of the world, of the unconscious world. And so to retreat from that, in a sense, to turn 180, to face the self, to face what's within, that's noble. I'm sorry. People aren't going to like hearing that. And ultimately, that dichotomy doesn't need to be so stark, the world and the spirit, but at a certain point in the path, that is the reality. And that turning and facing the self is a high calling. It's noble. And it's reality. It's a confrontation with reality. It's a pursuit of truth. That's the real fire. The world, as shitty as it can be, as confusing, as painful, it takes balls, it takes guts, it takes metal, it takes fortitude, it takes a certain kind of madness, it takes, there's a big spider over there, or cricket maybe. It takes something extraordinary, and I'll think of a good word here in a moment, to turn within, to try to heal. And another thing you recognize on the path is how this world is not geared for that. This world is built upon certain vulnerabilities in the human condition to maximize that, and increasingly so to kind of extract, our attention and to further and further divide us inwardly and externally. But to turn the other direction and say, that's truly countercultural. Truly countercultural. And we do it at great cost, typically. Read the lives of the saints. These are not stories, idyllic stories of happily ever after. No, these are people who have suffered immensely to contend with the evils of life, to not fragment, to not split in the direction of being a perpetrator of evil or being a victim, but to transform evil. Um, and so there is a season of retreat for many, many of us. It's almost implicit in the path, in the idea of healing, because healing is being divided is default. So healing is what? Atypical, abnormal, extraordinary. What would be the right antonym of default? Atypical, I don't know. Is something special. It's something unique. It's, forgive me. I got off of work and I'm still kind of out of it, but to contend with all the blindness in our own hearts, in our own psyche, in the accumulated damage and wounding and weight that we've been carrying and accruing in this world. But not only that, to contend with the madness of our family systems, these things that have just been allowed to move down the generational lines, birth after birth, generation after generation, amplified by the culture at large. And then you factor in spiritual realms and spiritual interference, which we little understand, partially at best, to the extent that we understand it at all. And yet there's a nobility inside the human spirit. Otherwise, none of this would suck, right? In and of itself, the fact that the misery we experience that attends to this life, suffering, is a testament to the nobility of the human spirit, nobility of God shining in and through and with us. If we didn't have that, again, it's this impossible situation of being in this described loony bin that I've been detailing, and yet having a human heart that says no, that's this is not right. It's like had we just extracted that little stumbling block of a human heart and just didn't have that to deal with, then it just wouldn't matter, all the chaos, all the madness of the world. But the fact is, we do have a moral compass, we do have nobility, I'd say we do have divinity, that we are divine creatures. Now, did we sign up for this? I hesitate to say something that glib. I know again, I would never create a world like this. I know how much I've suffered and struggled, and this is just one little story, one little, not even a drop in the pond, you know? It's like I would never, ever, 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 ever subject anybody to this world. And I know that that doesn't go down easy for people who want to throw on the rose colored glasses with everything right and say, oh, well, it's all grist for the mill. It's all, we're just here to learn and experience, and life is actually really beautiful. Well, I mean, I guess, I mean, if that's, see, the other pole of it is you don't want to get stuck just in the gloom and the misery, and that's a real sand trap, tar pit. Don't get stuck there. So there's a caution there. You don't want to get stuck there. But I feel I'm offering some of these words just as a counterbalancing measure to a lot of the spiritual uh, crap that goes around of positive affirmations and stuff. It's like, no, this world fucking sucks. Suffering sucks. We can be honest about that, man. And there's a piece there. There's a piece there. But you don't get stuck in that negativity. That's the trap. And that's another one of the ways that we fragment, right? And we set up shop in the negativity. We set up shop in the complaining about, I've got this coworker. It's funny because he kind of reminds me of a family member, actually, rest in peace, who passed on recently. But he has this kind of melodious warmth, warm voice in a certain way, and kind of this energy where he just seems really kind of affable, and he looks kind of like an affable character, kind of like a nice, warm, older guy. I don't know if I don't think this would quite be a curmudgeon. I don't know how you describe it. But it's like, and he has this kind of charisma where you kind of want to talk to him and engage, but it's just like every topic, no matter how trivial, no matter how neutral to even positive that you bring up, no matter how small, just the way his mind and system is oriented, just almost without skipping a beat, the the way he's gonna hear it, the way he's gonna translate it, the way he's gonna speak it, it's just gonna be some negative. It's like there's a negativity fixation, but he says it in a way where it seems like it's a real joy for him to be so negative. Have you met people like that? And I'm not describing it so well. It's not something I can really relate to intuitively. So, so it's sort of hard for me to describe it, the energy of it. It's like here's a small example. And forgive me, I'm just riffing right now, but one day I was I was walking through the store, and they had this guy, like a sales rep or something, came in, and we just got this new contraption. It's like a vacuum cleaner. I mean, there's all these like industry specific. One of the marvels, I mean, there's so much about like a modern grocery store, the supply chain, the technology that makes it possible, all the different layers of cooperation and humanity, the growing technologies. I'm not saying it's all a positive thing. Let's leave that discussion out of this, but just there's a, a marvel to the whole system that when that when you pick up that apple, just the vast interconnected network uh, in the sort of for that apple to appear, how all the moving parts that had to come together for that apple to for you to be able to pick up that apple. But there's all these, standardizations that have made it possible, with something like produce. I mean, even just like barcodes and UPCs, and there's just all this implicit technology and coordination and standardization, I guess is one of the words. But there's a whole industry, of products and store specific type of products. I'm probably not doing the best job describing this, but there's this specific, I'm not even sure what you would call it, like a cleaning device. I want to say a vacuum cleaner, but it's like a vacuum cleaner, steam cleaner. It's got like 20 different attachments, and it's kind of an unwieldy, I don't know if monstrosity is being a little bit dramatic, but anyways, and it's like for a very specific function, for a very specific thing, dealing with the specific kind of displays that we have, and it's like um, intentionally built to fit into these specific. It was built with certain. It was built with the specific type of shelves and the specific type of dimensions of these shelves and of these other. Gosh, I'm at such a paucity. Is that the right word? Such a lack of appropriate vocabulary here, so forgive me. Wish I could describe it better. But it's like tailor-made, custom-made. This sort of device wouldn't make sense in a home. It wouldn't make sense, anywhere else. It's like it found its niche in response to how these stores are designed. So anyways, this guy came through, I guess he's a sales rep, and he was demoing it for a group of employees. And I happened to be walking past, watching them all gathered around while he's, showing all these 20 different arms and how to operate this thing. It looked funny, and I quickly had this memory of Dr. Seuss, Star-Bellied Sneetches. I don't know if that's the name of the book, but if you've read it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The Star-Bellied Sneetches. It's like this salesman comes through town. Dr. Seuss, those books, I think they tend to have kind of deeper allegorical meanings, and I'm sure I could piece it out if if I took just a moment to think about it. But this guy comes through town with this device where he's putting on, I can't remember this exactly, forgive me, but he's like, the device, it's just this crazy looking contraption. And I think he's trying to sell it, or he's just selling access to the device or something, I don't know. This is all kind of way beside the point, but these Sneetches, these furry, kind of big bird looking creatures, line up to get stars impressed on them. I guess it's some kind of a metaphor about elitism, in group, out group, and how sort of superficial, and maybe it's about racism, that we commit to these superficial identities, like, oh, these guys have stars and we don't, and so they're better, and now we want to get the stars, and then he comes through selling removal of the stars, or and just completely manipulates that aspect, that vulnerability in our human psyche of wanting to belong and wanting to be like everybody else. Anyways, long story long, so I saw that device and just had that image in my mind, you know, and it kind of fits because that device in the Dr. Seuss book is just so useless and like a racket, like a scam. Um, yeah, there's a lot packed into those children's stories sometimes. But anyways, that coworker that I'm talking about with this like strong negativity bias, strong tendency towards negativity, he was in that group, and so afterwards, and he and I have had a number of kind of blowouts, and he's a prickly character in many ways, and which is part of the whole reason I'm trying to make this video, and I'll get there eventually. Not him in particular, but there's a broader point there. But I just was talking to him, and or he came up, and I don't know what he was. I forget the exact context, but anyways, I tried to share that with him. Here's like a good story, just like a funny thing. I hadn't thought everything that I've just described. I hadn't thought it through at all or anything. Just kind of a funny image, and I shared that with him. I said, I saw you. I asked him, have you ever read Dr. Seuss? Do you remember the Star-Bellied Sneetches? And he said he had. And then I said, that's what came to mind when I walked past and saw you guys all gathered around this machine. It reminded me of that book. And I said it with a smile just because it was just a funny, stupid little throwaway comment. And boy, he just like lit into this like 5-minute rant just about how disappointed he was with the machine, and just going on and on, just dumping complaining, but he does it with this kind of not charisma, that would be the wrong word, but you just get a sense for him that it gives him vitality. It's like there's an identity there, there's a fixation, and it helps him to feel, I don't know if good would be the right word here, but it helps him to feel alive somehow. Now I'm way, way, way off track here. I guess the point I was making is, we don't want to get fixated there in the negativity. And so forgive me that I'm expressing things in kind of I'm trying to just be honest and direct about how the world is. And I'm sort of I'm still in the first phase of laying out the groundwork, the premise, and bear with me if you've made it this far. But we do have this nobility and this sense within us that even if it's a remote sense of there is a wholeness that's possible, there is a healing that's possible. We don't enjoy, even though this guy seems to enjoy misery in some sense. That's not quite the right way to say it either, but there is an enjoyment in misery because it shores up the ego. It gives it a place to stand and to be constantly against something. Contrarian it's kind of a related phenomenon, but to be bitter, to be angry, to be complaining, that's an addiction, that's a fixation. That's another way of looking at addiction. Get addicted to the toxic negative thinking in our mind, and so many people are so willing to oblige that. That's part of that social matrix that's really hard to see when you're in it. But when you're outside of it, all the negativity, that misery loves company, that kind of thing. And gossiping is another one of those mainlining, this was a drug. It's another one of those social, and it's a trap. And it's sad because I think so many people have just said, fuck it, you know? Our lives are so broken. This world is so hard. This world is so dark in so many ways that they've just sort of surrendered to the momentum of darkness. And see, all of these addictions rely on motion. And if you can just stay in motion long enough, there is a kind of functional numbness, or ultimately it self-destructs. I hate to be the bearer of that news, but most people, many people, are already well aware of that. You know, see, with something like alcohol or even heavier substances, um, the gift there, if we can call it a gift, is it brings you to your knees a lot quicker because it destroys your body. Gossiping, negativity, very toxic, very unhealthy, and will destroy your life. But it might give you a few more years if that's your main drug, your main weapon. And you're going to find a lot of social capital and approval there. That's again another one of the reasons why the spiritual path is so lonely, because you more and more are unable to do that. You lose a taste for it, is one way to say it, and it sort of falls away. You know, in the best case scenario, you come out of resonance with it, is one kind of cheesy way to say it, but um, you but you can also just have the insight and see that it's a way of you not dealing with your own shit. You make somebody else wrong. You project outwards. That's all. It's like that's 99% of what we're doing in in the world. Just pay attention. I mean, is any of this surprising? I don't think it is. It's just hard for us. We don't want to hear it, I think. But we're projecting our pain onto other people. And there's a relief there. It's like, they're wrong. Thank God. Those idiots over there, they're wrong. Sometimes they are. I can be honest about that too. We don't have to go full Byron Katie, you know. Anyways, let's not go down that road. Forgive me. That's not exactly what I want to say, but gossip is one of those things. It's like, not only is it a relief to sort of project our pain onto somebody else, or to delight in somebody else's misery, Schadenfreude, and that's a little hit, that's a little drug hit for us, a little momentary relief. But it also strengthens a kind of false intimacy between people, the two people gossiping, or however many people. And there's a safety in that, protection in that. Spiritual path is the path without a net in many ways. So again, I just can't stress enough, we have it so fucking backwards in this world. Spiritual adepts, people pursuing healing, those are the heroes. Integrity is heroic. Given everything that I've described here and have failed to describe about this world, that's the real act of courage. Isn't that obvious? It isn't, but it should be. Now, you could also say the spiritual adept is the one who's just exhausted the hedonic treadmill quickest, or the person who's desperate enough, and that's true too. But not everybody who's desperate chooses to heal. Some people choose to inflict harm. I don't even want to say the atrocious things that happen when we're in pain, but we all know it. We all see the news. We all see it in our own lives. Inflict harm on others, inflict harm on ourselves. Choose to heal. You have to give some credit there, even if it is out of desperation. And typically it is. Because again, we're in cuckoo, upside down world here. Cuckoo land. Now, for reasons that I don't, maybe in another video I could talk about, I don't know if I want to talk about, but I bumped up against homelessness and poverty. Had people help me out with money at a clutch moment. So that I didn't become homeless, not that I became. Anyways, that's a long story, but that is a part of the story. So I have to be grateful there that happened, and acknowledge that that there was a temporary support that I got that helped me in a really crucial moment. And so I had to take a job, and that was a long, complicated process. I've got videos on that, but I ended up getting this job, and I've stayed in it as long as I've stayed in it. You know, there's a thing on the spiritual path, you'll hear people talk about embodiment. And there's a great truth and wisdom to it, because we get so deep in the work of healing and so remote from, I don't want to say reality because we're moving actually into reality, but remote from the world as it is sometimes, that we can become dysfunctional. And the practicalities of keeping the lights on in this world take a back seat. And so we become imbalanced. And so a lot of us need to hear that teaching on embodiment, which basically, I mean, one way, there's a couple of different levels to describe here, but one aspect of that is being able to live in this world in a healed way. And so for me, a part of that job search, acquiring the job, I had a few other jobs prior to this, actually. It's doing a bunch of different things. Man, this is a longer story, so I'm trying to triage and synthesize a bunch of information here just to make the story simple. So I got this job, and it's been very difficult. I just have to be honest about that. It's in a way that previous jobs were not, because I didn't have such a priority on healing and living with integrity and not projecting and not harm. You know, I've worked many jobs, had a whole ass career actually in a past iteration of this life. But in a way, those versions of me kind of relied on a certain level of, I don't want to say manipulation. Well, I mean, in a sense, social manipulation is. I'm cautious to be too self-critical here, because I just was doing the best that I could at the time. You know, we're all kind of in that in that place at any given moment, given all the contingencies of life. In some sense, you could say we're just doing the best we can. Um, but it relied on a certain amount of falsity, those previous jobs, and a certain amount of blindness, and a certain amount of stuffing and suppressing, and just unhealthy. Who I was then was not who I am now, and mostly, for the worse, for the better now. I'm sorry, I'm getting talked out here. Who I was then is not who I am now. And who I am now is a more healed version of myself. So, but for whatever reason, God brought me to my knees, and I had to get a job. And after a huge amount of effort put into the search, and found this job that was kind of the least awful option. But man, it's hard. But part of me, and this is where the kind of spiritual ego and spiritual mythology can be useful, the path, and also at a certain point needs to be discarded, reassessed, or questioned. And the teachings around embodiment, part of me going into all this was thinking, okay, well, this is God opening up a chance for me to embody what I've learned and what I've healed in this environment, sort of being tested in the fire. And I can say that, and I can see some truth in that in these past 6 months. Ways that, because it's a very unconscious, I'll just be plain about it, it's a very unconscious, shitty, kind of brutal cohort of people. Not everybody, there are gems there, but the sort of overall environment, the overall matrix is at a relatively low level. And again, it's not the worst possible place to be, not by a long shot, but it's just humanity. It's like the ambient temperature, the ambient level of confusion and shittiness. And I'm not a spiritual hero, a superhero. I'm just a person. I'm just a guy. I'm just one person. And when you're in that kind of a stew for that long a period of time, it's gonna be difficult, and I've got other things going on spiritually and in my life. I've got a nervous system that's really difficult to live with in some ways. And now, have I learned things? Yeah, I have. In certain ways to speak up, Man, this is a long video. Forgive me, guys, if anybody watches this. Therapeutic for me, if nothing else, I guess. But hopefully somebody can connect and find something here. But I'm at the point now where I've decided it's time for me to find another job. It's not I've had enough money to stay afloat, but in 6 months, living very austerely, very minimally, have saved very little. And I need to make more money. I'd like to make more money. I don't know about need. I guess that's up to God. What do I need? But I'd feel better if I could make some more money. It's physically quite taxing, and a part of me really likes that. I've gotten in better shape in certain ways, developed certain musculature in my body, and I guess that's kind of vain in a sense. But yeah, I mean, aesthetically, I like it, but also I think it's nice to have some more muscle mass. Not like huge gains or something, but I like the physicality of it. I hate to say this, man, this is gonna sound sexist, but it's mostly men in the department I work in part because it's so physical, and I like that. I don't like working with women. I'm sorry. I really don't. Not that I hate women, but especially, I mean, just cattiness, gossiping, just, it's just such, man, the male mind and the female mind are very different. And that's a lesson that's been hammered home. I mean, I've always known that at some level, but that's become very clear working here. Now, there's a lot of guys out there that I hate working with too. I don't enjoy working with. This is not an ideal setup for me. I guess just personality wise, and I have to say culture wise too, kind of my culture of how I approach things and communication style. And there's kind of a brutalist ethic that prevails here. It's a lot of shit talking, a lot of gossiping, a lot of negativity, things like that. That's like 95% is just people complaining to each other about other people. And again, just everything I've been describing in this video. And it's hard to really sustain that when you're not participating in that. And I've figured out ways to set boundaries to the best of my ability. There's only so much you can do when you're caught. Again, you're not a superhero, right? You're susceptible. Even when you're healed, it still takes a toll. Even when you've done a lot of healing, not to say healed, but done a lot of healing, it still is going to take a toll after a while. And I'm feeling it on my body. That's one thing. It is taking a bit of a toll, and I've got some other issues with my back and things. But part of why I've been hanging around, I think, is because I have this belief about embodiment, and that I'm being put through this gauntlet right now so I can learn skills. And the skill for me, one of the skills is how to confront and set boundaries with very unconscious people in a way that doesn't damage me in the speaking of it, in a way that doesn't denigrate my spirit, erode my spirit in it, in a way that's true, honest, direct, in alignment with integrity. And that's very difficult. It doesn't perhaps sound difficult to an untrained ear, but if you've genuinely contended with these issues, and you've got a high priority on healing, not and accountability, and not deepening, entrenching darkness and confusion and unconsciousness on this planet, then you realize what a balancing act and what a fine line and what a noble and high thing this is that I'm talking about. Because the tendency that we have as humans is to go attack back, fight fire with fire. They go low, you go lower. Or to flee, right? Fight or flight, or freeze. That's the human predicament, right? One or the other. And this that I'm talking about is something different, where you stand in truth and you speak it like a laser, with a kind of laser-like coherence. And this has definitely been a proving grounds in some sense, or an experimentational field, because there's just so much opportunity for it. And I have to say, I've gotten it wrong mostly. I've gotten it wrong mostly. Um, but I've also started to get it right in certain ways. But the process has been absolutely agonizing for me. As you come home from work having accumulated just 20 different, cuts, psychic cuts from the day, from people just being shitty. And it's not that you've taken it personal exactly, because you see how it's just how people interact, but you also see that it's not how you choose to interact, and that it doesn't feel good, and that's not healthy. So what do you do in those situations? And finding that language and that alignment for me there has been some growth there. And and I had a real big breakthrough actually with one of these interactions recently with someone who's just been, this one has been kind of personal. Somebody's been kind of just very malicious and ugly, ugly to me. And I had a breakthrough moment with one of these, catching it in the moment when I was being trespassed against. Sounds very biblical, right? Grieved or attacked, and speaking, in a direct way. And it was there was something, I was really struggling with it for a while, and this felt like a kind of a breakthrough moment. And so, yeah, and so there are some lessons there, but I think the lesson now is it's time to leave, because that's sort of an exhausting game to play, and it's not like as much of a breakthrough as I've had in some of these instances, as much of a learning curve in some of the ways that I've communicated and gotten it wrong and messed up many many times. Um, it's like we start all over the next day, and there's five more just. And see, when you're trying to work and just get through the day and do the job, and it's been the holidays, so it's been kind of crazy, trying to keep pace with everything, and then you're also trying to simultaneously stay conscious enough to have a good response and a good defense and a good transformation of a interaction. It's just more material than can really, it's just not healthy after a certain while. There's a certain point where embodiment makes sense and you go through a trial, and there's a certain point where it's just like, I think you're just harming yourself by staying in an unhealthy place. And I think that's the lesson now for me. So I ask God's guidance and God's hand that He would move me swiftly into a better position, something that would be a better fit for me, to my own sort of personal culture, my way of approaching life, my communication style, my uh, yeah, I mean, I can think of many other types of positions, that would be a better fit for me. Let's just put it that way. So I just ask for guidance for that. Anyways, yeah, because I'm feeling pretty run down on many different levels, and I have to be careful with my mental health and my spirit. And so, may you be well. May you be well. Take care.